In this step I shall quote some exercises that render possible a deliberate passive communication with the invisible ones from a magical point of view. In a certain way the methods resemble the spiritualistic ones, but the magician will soon notice that he is not training himself to become a person without any will of his own, called a medium by the spiritualists. The magician may not become a plaything of uncontrollable powers, on the contrary, he directs his powers consciously and also learns to use them deliberately. In this respect, he considers the laws of the invisible world as well as those of the physical world. To further the passive communication with invisible beings, there are recommended mainly the levitation exercises with the purpose to magically prepare any part of the body in such a manner that such beings can manifest themselves with the help of levitation. Let us begin the practice at once. Sit comfortably in front of a table and put your hands on it. Perform an accumulation of vital power in your right hand and concentrate on the fact that you are able to manage your hand and your fingers solely with your willpower, i.e., not with the help of the muscles. Afterwards, let the accumulated vital power diffuse into the universe by way of the imagination. Now begin with the proper levitation exercise. Accumulate the air element in the forefinger of the right hand, and concentrate on the forefinger becoming as light as air. Next try to imagine that you are lifting the forefinger with the help of your willpower, leaving the hand with the other fingers quiet and motionless on the table. You must have the feeling that it is not your muscles lifting the finger, but that your willpower is doing so. As soon as you have managed to get the finger up, let it drop by your willpower. Should you stop to concentrate while the finger is still aloft, it would drop instantly. One could try this only to establish how far the willpower or the muscles are intervening in it. If you are able to levitate the forefinger of the right hand with your willpower, you can proceed in the same manner with the other fingers. The levitation exercise is fulfilled as soon as you can lift and drop all the fingers of the right hand at your own will. Now proceed in the same way with your left hand and its fingers. Having managed this as well, try to lift the whole hand this way, first the right hand and afterwards the left one. Provided you can notice a success after several exercises, go ahead by lifting the hand at will not only up to the wrist, but right up to the elbow. You can extend these exercises and lift both hands at once with the help of your willpower. Should the magician decide to extend these exercises over the whole body, he would succeed after a while, without any doubt, in raising his whole body by his willpower. He would be able to walk upon the water without sinking down, he could even ascend into the air with his whole body and accomplish numerous other similar actions just as it pleases him. It is of course obvious that he would have to practice these exercises for many years in order to gain the aforesaid success. Grand adepts do manage to produce such phenomena without any difficulty without being forced to do such exercises for years, because it all depends on the magical maturity and development. Never will any magician of a high rank perform phenomena of that kind without an urgent reason, and least of all to satisfy the curiosity of other people. At our stage of development, we shall be content to move the hands and fingers according to our own will. Having reached this point, we shall turn to a different preparatory exercise which is absolutely necessary for the passive communication with the invisible ones. I shall demonstrate the practice as follows. Sit down at a table and rest your hands calmly on it. Now try plastically to imagine that your spiritual hand is protruding from the physical one. Put the psychic hand close by the physical one or let it glide through the table to your knees. You have to regard the imaginary spiritual hand as your real one. In the carnal hand there is now occurring a mental vacuum that has the shape of the external hand. At this moment, think that the carnal hand is quite harmless, being thus in the fourth dimension, the Akasa principle. If you did manage this for a short while, go back again with your mental hand into the carnal one and finish the exercise. Repeat this several times until you succeed in exteriorizing the hand as described for at least 5 minutes. You can work on the other hand in the same manner. As soon as you have managed this very well, you are prepared to take up the communication with the invisible ones. We can see by now that the magic preparation is very different from that of the spiritualists who behave passively insofar as they take a pencil into their hands and write or paint. Whether the messages that are asked for by the medial writing or painting of the spiritualists are actually coming out of the fourth dimension, or the way they say it, from the world beyond, or whether they originate only in the subconsciousness of the medium in question is entirely left to the judgment of the magician. A hand that has been exteriorized according to our method has really been transplanted into the fourth dimension and can be seen by any being of that sphere that wants to use it to send messages to our material world. As soon as the beginner has done these exercises, he is able to communicate with the beings of the fourth dimension. The magician will first of all try to come in contact with his guardian genius, his spiritual guide to whom he has the closest relationship. Every scholar of magic is fully aware of the fact that the divine providence at the hour of his birth has given him a being with the purpose to watch over its protege, to guide and to inspire him. In accordance with the development and the karma, this being can be a deceased person or else an intellectual entity not yet embodied on this planet. This being takes care of the spiritual comfort of the protege mostly up to the puberty period. The more man is maturing intellectually, the less attention does the spiritual leader pay to him, especially in cases of people who do not even remember their guide. The contact is loosened more and more. A lot could be said about the ranks of such guardians and their activity as well, but that would overstep the frame of this work. The magician certainly has got the faculty to communicate with his guide to learn all he wants to know and to receive everything he is in need of. Provided he is honestly interested in the whole problem of ennobling his character and working hard on his magical development, he may be quite sure that his guide will try first to make himself known to him. Therefore the scholar should aspire to come into contact with this guardian genius. Here follows the necessary practice: take a sidereal pendulum. It does not have to be a special pendulum, a ring or a small object will do likewise, even a nail tied to a silk thread if nothing else is conveniently near. Twist the end of the thread several times around your forefinger. The pendulum is swinging about 8 to 12 inches free in the air. Sit down at a table and put both your hands on it. The elbow of the hand holding the pendulum is to be propped on the table. The hand is to be kept upright with the pendulum swinging free about 2 to 3 inches above the tabletop. Put a glass of water, a vase, or any tinkling object about 2 to 3 inches from the pendulum. As soon as you have finished all the preparations according to these instructions, exteriorize your mental hand from the one holding the pendulum and put the mental hand close by the carnal one. Having done so, develop a state of trance in yourself for a few moments, the way you have been instructed in the chapter about mental training, by recognizing yourself with your consciousness in the solar plexus. Therefore you are now in the fourth dimension. In this condition, call your guide and ask him in your mind that he might manifest to you with the help of your magically prepared hand. Keep silent and observe the pendulum, beseeching the guide at the same time to indicate with one stroke of the pendulum on the glass a no, with 2 strokes perhaps, and with 3 strokes a yes. You will be very astonished indeed to notice that the pendulum is beginning to move, giving the requested strokes. Sensitive people will even notice that the hand holding the pendulum has been moved by a strange hand. You will probably have the feeling that your own hand has become a glove with a strange hand in it that is moving the pendulum. Other persons again will not notice anything at all, but instead have the sensation that the desire is guiding the mind indirectly, moving the muscles of the hand and hence causing the pendulum to sway to and fro. The outcome is absolutely individual and depends on the aptitudes. Supposing the first attempt to produce the communication with the spiritual leader should fail, there is no need to be discouraged. After a few more attempts, every scholar will certainly succeed in bringing about the communication. Once the connection has been established, one can ask questions to the leader whether mentally or aloud, which will be answered with a yes or no or perhaps. The questions mainly ought to concern the leader himself, for example if he is willing to manifest himself or if he is already embodied on this planet and such like. As soon as the contact has been brought about with the help of the pendulum, one can use a planchette instead of waiting for the strokes on the glass. This gadget is a circular disc divided in sections, each marked with a letter of the alphabet. A small circular blank is left in the center of it. The pendulum will point out single letters, and by spelling the letters, one will receive messages in detail from the leader. After achieving a good result, one can arrange for a bigger planchette containing the entire alphabet, numbers, sections with yes, no and perhaps, days and hours. In the center is a blank space to start from. For performances with this planchette, the pendulum is replaced with a small lacquer glass. Trace an arrow with ink or paint to serve as a pointer on the base of the glass. Now take the lower part of the glass between your forefinger and middle finger and allow the glass to be moved on the letters by the leader's hand. The arrow will then indicate the respective letter. To operate an easier gliding motion of the glass, one can set the planchette under glass, because the lacquer glass will move about much more easily on the smooth glass base. The scholar may find out for himself such and similar appliances. He will also find many constructive observations in the spiritualistic literature. All that matters is satisfaction of the most urgent needs of the moment. A further method is to beseech the leader to lift the forefinger of the magically prepared hand. Ask him to lift the finger once if the answer is no, twice if perhaps, and 3 times if the answer is yes. Noticing a success with the forefinger, try it with the other fingers too. One will notice that there is always a certain finger that is particularly easy to get on with. One ought to stick with the finger that is moving best. This of course depends on the flexibility. The magician will appreciate this method very much because it will enable him to operate a passive connection with the invisible world, either with his leader or with a deceased person, even in a situation where a planchette or a pencil cannot be used, such as at a party, outdoors, and so on. If he has acquired a certain skill in this matter, he can even hold his hand in his pocket and get replies of yes or no in a vast crowd. Having managed all these experiments, one can take up the mediumistic writing. The method is as follows: put a sheet of paper in front of you and take a pencil between thumb and forefinger like you do for writing. Now push a rubber ring not too tight over your thumb, forefinger and middle finger. You can make this ring by cutting it off a bicycle tire. The purpose of the ring is not to have to concentrate entirely on holding the pencil. Now induce a trance in yourself, call your spiritual leader, prepare your right hand magically for him to write with. In the beginning you will notice only some uneven lines, later on illegible words, and after some exercising, words and sentences will come about. When one sheet of paper has been filled with writing, change it for a new one. You can get a reply to every question. By constant exercising you will acquire such a skill that the medial writing does not cause any difficulty at all. In this manner you will be able to call deceased friends, relatives, and members of your family with whom you want to get in touch. The magician will be convinced that there is no such thing as hence and beyond, that there are only different degrees of density in the 4th dimension where divers beings exist, and death will not mean the end of everything to him, but a passing over to the 4th dimension. Finally, I should like to remark that there are several kinds of medial writing according to the aptitudes, which I shall mention briefly. 1. The automatic, mechanical, method. In this case, the hand moves absolutely automatically, without the magician knowing what he wants to write or what the spirit concerned is going to write. Messages in foreign languages will also be received, even in languages the magician does not know and has never heard before. Paintings and drawings can be created as well. 2. The inspirational method, the most frequent. Here the messages will be given a sort of thinking aloud inside or outside the own personality. In this case, one practically knows beforehand what the being is about to write. By frequent repetition this inspiration will become aloud thinking and listening in the passive communication. One will perceive messages from the depth of the soul or from outside of the self. 3. The intuitive method, where you have the feeling as if you did the writing yourself. Any questions will be answered instantly. Nobody but oneself appears to know the answer to the question. This is a kind of clear knowledge. The hand writes words and sentences in full consciousness, without the person hearing anything or being inspired in any way. The methods also can appear in a mixed kind, for example half automatic and half inspirational, or intuitive and inspirational, or all together. Which of the methods will be the dominant one will only be known after a long period of exercising. Each of the methods is good and reliable, provided you are using it honestly and candidly. Practice makes perfect. Now I should like to give a comment with regard to the questions one is going to ask the beings and to the answers one can expect. First of all, the magician is not supposed to boast of his exercises and results. The more silent he is keeping about his communication with the invisible ones, the better for him. Furthermore, when choosing the questions to be asked, you always have to consider that the beings you are contacting are subject to laws different from those we have to deal with on this physical plane. Besides, beings that have been living before on this earth will soon lose their orientation because our physical plane is tridimensional, depending on time and space, which does not occur in the sphere of the fourth dimension. Only highly developed beings are capable of giving correct information about time, events, future, etc. Consequently, the magician will first inquire about the home of those beings and rather prefer messages about the fourth dimension for the sake of his own education. Later on, as soon as the scholar has developed his spiritual senses, he will no longer need the passive communication with the invisible ones because he is himself able to achieve anything about which such a being could inform him. The passive communication only serves the purpose to be convinced of the existence of another world which everybody will enter and live in after passing away. Summary of exercises of Step VI Magic Mental Training 1. Space Magic 2. Magic Psychic Training 1. Projection of elements outwards, A through the body, accumulated through the solar plexus, B accumulated through the hands, especially dynamically through the fingers. 3. Magic Physical Training 1. Preparation for the passive communication with the invisible ones, A release of the hand, B preparation of the fingers with the help of the pendulum, pencil, planchette, etc. 2. Passive communication, A with the own guardian genius, B with deceased people and other beings. End of Step V. Step 6. Before I describe the exercises of Step 6, I shall underline once more that all the previous exercise have to be under perfect control in order to keep the balance in the higher degree of development too. It would be absolutely useless to skip one of the steps or to omit and neglect one of the exercises. Any gap would become very perceptible and the scholar would have great difficulty to make up for one or the other problem in his development. Consequently, the main condition for success remains an excellent basic training. Magic Mental Training 6. In this step we are faced with the meditation on the spirit. I have already been talking in detail about the mental sphere and the mental body, hence the spirit, in the theoretical part of this book. Now it is worthwhile to look at the functions of the spirit with respect to the four elements, differentiating these functions, which can be achieved by special meditation. The properties of the spirit in conformity with the four elements are as follows. The will is subject to the fire principle, the intellect with all its parallel aspects of intelligence and memory underlies the principle of air, the feeling with all its aspects belongs to the water element, and the consciousness with all its aspects establishing the connection of the three elements is subordinate to the earth principle. Look inward as into your own spirit, observe yourself and the functions of the spirit and meditate on it. You must know how to imagine each of the functions corresponding to the element. If you manage to distinguish the functions of the spirit, i.e., if you have got a clear impression about it, you may continue. This preliminary exercise is very important because it will enable the magician to influence these functions with the respective element on the mental plane in himself as well as in others, to master and to strengthen or to eliminate them. Another exercise is to ascertain for oneself the whole mental body in the astral body, together in the material body, like a hand in a fine silk glove that is put into a thick glove. Your hand ought to feel both gloves. The same thing is supposed to occur in the whole mental body. You should feel your spirit in the fine astral body and this one again in the material body. This feeling is the spirit. Meditate on this problem at any suitable opportunity. As soon as you are quite sure that your spirit is captivating the astral body as well as the material one, feeling and moving it, and that it is your spirit that performs all the actions through the two wraps, you can go one step farther. Whether consciously, half-consciously or nearly subconsciously, everybody is executing some action suggested by an inner or an outer impulse without paying any attention to it. The next exercise will teach you to accomplish actions fully consciously, little acts in the beginning, great ones later on. You ought to try to extend the duration of each conscious action. The wording consciously does not mean that one is all attention with the spirit, but with the imagination and the feeling that the spirit with the help of the soul and the material body is accomplishing the action. For example, if I am walking along the road, I do not think about the fact that I am walking, but that my spirit is walking and moving the astral and the material feet. The same thing happens to the arms and all the other parts of the body. If you are able to accomplish any action in this way for at least 10 minutes, you are mastering the exercise perfectly. The longer you can endure this without side effects such as dizziness or disturbances of balance, all the better for you. For this particular reason, it is advisable to begin first with small actions over a short spell of time and to extend them as long as you like. This experiment is very important because it will give the scholar the possibility to accomplish any action with a mental as well as astral connection with the material body according to his working with the mental or the astral sphere. Such an action is called the magical action. The scholar will certainly understand now why magic rituals never show any success with persons who have not been initiated or who have not been trained in magic, because people like these do not own the capacity of executing the ritual magically, i.e., they are not prepared to work in connection with the material stuff in a mental and astral way. Let us take the example of a magnetizer putting his hands on a patient's body or performing magnetic strokes, but without allowing his mental and astral hand to emanate at the same time, nor imagining that the mental force is pervading and influencing the spirit, the astral power doing the same to the astral body of the patient, and the material power influencing the material body. This magnetizer will never achieve anything else but a partial success, because the patient does indeed consist of all the three components, namely the body, the soul, and the spirit. That goes without saying for the magician, that the mental body is only influencing the mental sphere or the spirit in the same way as the astral body affects the astral sphere only, i.e., the soul, and the material body concerns the material body only. This law has to be respected. Hence it is necessary for the magician to adopt a mental as well as a psychic disposition in order to perform actions whether as a spirit or in connection with the soul. Once he has understood this problem very well and mastered the practice perfectly, he can advance in his development. The next task will deal with the magical training of the senses. First of all, a very important preliminary exercise, similarly to the previous exercise, you are realizing in this one as well that not your material eyes see everything, but that it is the spirit that perceives all with the help of the astral and the physical eyes. Meditate on this problem as often as possible. You will have to imagine for at least 5 minutes that the spirit is looking through the physical eyes and actually does see. The longer you are able to endure this, all the better for you. You will become a master here as well by constant repetition of this experiment. Having achieved a success in this exercise with the eyes, turn to the ears by realizing that it is not your physical ear that is receiving the sound waves, but that the mental ears are perceiving everything with the help of the astral and the material eyes. If you can book the same result as you did in the case of the eyes, continue in the same manner with the senses and imagine that the spirit, with the help of the astral and the material body, is feeling objects, cold, warmth, etc. Practice this experiment diligently until you can master it with the eyes, ears, and the feeling. Should you wish to develop special faculties, try it also with the olfactory sense and the taste. But the keenest attention should be paid to the 3 sense organs of seeing, hearing and feeling, which are the most useful for practical magic. If you achieve good results in the mental ascertainment of the senses, try to adjust your spirit to 2 of the senses at the same time. Begin with the eyes and the ears. If you manage to bring it about for at least 5 minutes without any interruption, adjust your spirit to 3 senses at once, that is seeing, hearing and feeling. If you can manage this as well, you have indeed made progress in your magical development. This preliminary exercise is very important for the so-called clairvoyance, clairaudience, and clairsentience, and ought to be mastered perfectly. The scholar will find the principal exercise in step 7 of this course. Magic Psychic Training, 6. In step V we learned how to project the elements outwards. Now we shall go farther and learn how to master the Akasa principle with respect to the elements. It has been mentioned in the theoretical part that the elements originate in the Akasa principle, by which they are dominated and kept in the correct balance. After a long time of exercising, a magician who has achieved good results with the elements will also be able to control the finest principle, that is the astral ether. The exercise is as follows: take up your usual position, asana, and close your eyes. Imagine that you are in the center of an unlimited space. There is no above or below or sideways. This unlimited space is filled with the finest energetic matter, the universal ether. Ether is colorless, but to our senses it appears to be of ultraviolet, near black-violet color, and this is the color in which we imagine the etheric matter. You are inhaling this etheric matter and conveying it deliberately through pulmonary breathing to the blood. If you have achieved a certain skill in doing so, execute the same operation by breathing through the lungs and pores as you did in the accumulation of vital power, but with the difference that you inhale the colored ether and fill your whole body with it instead of with the vital power. In performing this exercise you have to retain the feeling of being united to the entire infinite space. You have to be as it were completely secluded from the world. It is necessary to become acquainted with this unusual state of mind. In any case you ought to avoid losing consciousness and falling asleep. Supposing that you do feel tired, break off the exercise immediately and choose another time when you are more fit. After some successful exercises in the whole body pore breathing with Akasa, you can go ahead. We have heard that Akasa is the primary source, the sphere of all causes. Any deliberate cause, such as a wish, a thought, any imagination created in this sphere together with the dynamic conviction is bound to be realized with the help of the elements, regardless of the level or sphere on which the realization necessarily has to be performed. This is one of the greatest magic mysteries and a universal key for the magician, who will understand its range only later on in the course of his development. The scholar should always keep his mind on his own ethical development, which will certainly help him to do only good and noble deeds. Our next exercise will be to win absolute control of the elements with the help of the Akasa principle in all the 3 realms. The exercise is as follows: you are sitting in your usual position inhaling a stream of Akasa through the lungs and pores and filling the whole body with it. At this point I would like to mention that Akasa cannot be accumulated in the same way as vital power. At the very inhaling you must imagine that you are starting the control of the 4 elements. Consider that you have already got the faculty of mastering the elements and that they will fulfill everything you are ordering or wishing for, no matter on which plane the realization of your desires has to happen. With every breath you ought to feel your mastery of the elements. The faith and the confidence in your control of the elements has to be unshakable and imperturbable. You must not allow yourself the faintest doubt. Anyone who is working scrupulously through all these exercises will gain the absolute control of the elements after more or less exercising. A magician who has established the magical balance in himself with respect to the elements, having ennobled his character and having acquired the highest virtues and ideals, will very soon attain this power. He will feel his faith becoming as firm as a rock and will be absolutely sure of his conviction, which excludes any doubt at all. On the other hand, any person who has not been working scrupulously enough, or scholars who skipped any steps and neglected exercises will feel doubtful about one problem or another, and the influence of one element that is keeping him in check most of the time will not tolerate to be mastered. Here and now the scholar will realize why such a high value is set on scrupulousness and endurance in the execution of the exercises. There is no gap allowed to spring up in the process of development, otherwise the scholar will fall behind and some of the problems could only be set right under the greatest difficulties. A scholar who is perfectly sure of his mastering the elements will soon notice that he is capable of projecting the elements on all planes very easily, outwards as well as inwards, so that all seems to be a child's play to him. Having arrived at this point, the magician can turn to transferring the power of the elements into a suitable ritual. I have talked about this problem in detail already in the chapter about the rituals. The magician forms any ritual after his own liking by means of finger positions and gestures of the hands into which he is transferring the power. According to his magical development, he will certainly dispose of a sufficient amount of intuition so that he can compose the ritual suitable to the element in question. He can provide it with a self-selected word, formula, and link it to a certain sound corresponding to the element quabula. It is quite impossible to make a mistake here because the rituals are absolutely individual, purely personal. Therefore the rituals that the magician composes for this purpose are not to be imparted to anyone else. Another person could attain the same success in mastering the elements by using these rituals, which of course would happen at the expense of the power of the magician who actually composed the rituals. Supposing that a person who does not have the magical maturity makes use of such rituals, he would certainly suffer great damage, and bring ill fate to other people for whom the rituals had been used. Therefore be very careful and select only a kind of ritual that you can use in a large crowd as without anyone observing it, for example, a ritual with a finger position in your pocket. The genuine magician will regard this warning as fully justified. First of all, the magician must try to compose the ritual for an element of the astral sphere with which he is putting the virtue of one element in operation, and at the same time another ritual with the help of which he can dissolve this power again instantly if he chooses. In the same way he ought to operate with the other three elements, thus creating by his power 8 rights for the astral sphere and 8 for the material production as well. As soon as the rights become automatic by a long period of exercising and repeating, it will be sufficient to use the ritual only, which will make the elements start working immediately according to the purpose to be accomplished. If the magician wishes the effect to be cancelled, it will be enough to use the necessary revoking rite. This method should become a habit that renders performance easy and possible without any effort or imagination at all. I mentioned before that the magician is able to achieve everything through the action of the elements in the astral as well as in the material world. To attain this state of maturity, a great amount of patience, endurance, and tenacity will be required. Even then, when the scholar is developing more and more on higher levels, he ought to work at mastering the elements until he really becomes a true master. Provided he is possessed by high ideals and wants to do good deeds only to help mankind, divine providence will bless him, endowing him with unexpected faculties, to make the most of them. Magic physical training. 6. In this step any special training of the body is no longer necessary, but we shall practically use all the occult powers that the scholar has obtained in the course of the exercises, provided he followed all of the methods scrupulously and the practices really became habits. The scholar can of course deepen the exercises to obtain a better success. It is impossible to describe the entire practice of magic that a scholar could master eventually, because it would require another volume. I will only select some of the most interesting facts from the lot. In the meantime the scholar has matured so much that he will succeed in the practice of lower magic without any exception, especially if he aims only at high and noble ideals. One deliberate creation of elementals in contrast to thoughts living in their forms in the mental or spiritual sphere. The elementals are entities with a certain degree of intelligence deliberately created by a magician. Such elementals are capable of fulfilling certain tasks on the mental plane and obviously they may be looked at as obedient servants of the magician according to the purpose he aims at. Through the creation of elementals of the so-called elemental magic type, the magician can accomplish everything on the mental plane without any discrimination of his own or a strange sphere. I will quote only a few examples just because of the great variety. With the help of the elementals the magician can influence the mind of any other person optionally, he can strengthen or weaken man's mental and intellectual faculties, he can protect himself or others against foreign influences, transmute friendships into animosities or the other way around, he can produce a favorable atmosphere in associating with his fellow men, and he can bring under his control any body's will that is not yet developed or profiled. The businessman can enlarge the number of his customers, and the elementals can be helpful to him in many other ways. The genuine magician will always be inspired by good and noble intentions and keep the altruistic motive in mind if he is aiming at the highest level of magical maturity. The practice of creating elementals is very simple and an affair of the magician's imagination, but the following rules must be considered. 1. The elemental has to be given a form corresponding to the desire one wishes to be fulfilled. The form is to be created by intensive imagination. 2. The form, the so-called vessel or housing, has to be given a name of some sort. Everything existing, whether in a particular shape or shapeless, does have a name. If it has no name, it does not exist. 3. The task is to impress on the elemental with the help of the willpower and the imaginative faculty, that is, an authoritative order has to be given with respect to the kind of effect to be produced. Here as well, the present or imperative form formula must be retained in exactly the same way as I described it in the chapter dealing with subconsciousness. 4. The effectiveness is to be impressed on the elemental regardless whether it be a question of a permanent or a restricted effect. These 4 fundamental rules are to be respected if one intends to work successfully with elementals. I will render the practice even more understandable, and an illustrative case may show how it can be done. Supposing the magician intends to enforce someone's memory or any other intellectual faculty with the help of an elemental, the procedure is as follows. The magician imagines a universal ocean of light, from the luminous matter of which he shapes an enormous ball of light, compressing and accumulating it more and more with the help of his imagination until this ball has the size of approximately 12 to 20 inches. By this accumulation of light, the ball has become similar to a radiating sun. Now the magician impregnates this light ball with the desire and the firm conviction that it will exhibit the same power and quality as is supposed to revive and reinforce the desired mental faculties such as memory, eloquence, etc., in the respective person. As soon as the magician has shaped this mental sun or ball, he must give it a suitable name, say Lucy's, or the like. Besides, he is fixing the time when this ball is to affect the mental sphere of the person with terms like these. You ought to work in the mental sphere until the person concerned has attained the desired faculty in such a way that this faculty has become a habit. Having fixed the time, the magician orders the elemental to dissolve in and return to the ocean of light as soon as it has fulfilled its task. Expressing it magically, the birth and death of the elemental are fixed in exactly the same manner as man's or any other being's fate is. Considering the fact that an elemental knows neither time nor space, it may be directed to the mental sphere of the respective person. Its sending off happens quite suddenly, as if the connecting link between yourself and the elemental were torn. At the same moment, one turns to another job, one ceases to remember the elemental that has just been created. One may also accompany the breaking up with a certain farewell gesture, just as one did while creating it. All this is left entirely to the discretion of the scholar who, at this present state of development, should be quite capable of giving such and similar instructions himself. The more detached from the magician that such an elemental is, the more effective it will be in the mental sphere of the person for whom it was created. It can work independently in the mental sphere and will not be restricted in any way by the magician's mind. Now and again it is advisable to reload the elemental to give it a greater power of expansion. This is achieved by calling the elemental by the name given to it, back from the mental sphere of the person concerned, rendering it more dynamic through a new accumulation of light, and sending it off again. As soon as the elemental has fulfilled the required task, it will dissolve itself in the ocean of light. This example should suffice to give the magician a rule of conduct how to create elementals. The experiment described here often is used by adepts for the purpose of inspiring and strengthening scholars of low standard. Let us now turn to another similar topic that makes us acquainted with the so-called larvae. The difference between an elemental and a larva is basically the fact that an elemental is created deliberately by the magician, whereas the larvae form themselves involuntarily in the corresponding mental sphere as the result of a strong physical excitement, no matter what kind of excitement this happens to be. The stronger the excitement is, the more mental material a person is subsiding, the larva will become all the stronger, denser, and more viable, especially in the case of a regular and frequent repetition of the same physical excitement. This involuntary formation of larvae occurs in any human being, young or old, magically trained or not, regardless whether the person knows or ignores it. If the physical excitement is fading due to the fact that no attention has been paid to the upsetting affair, the larva too will disappear by and by until finally dissolving itself. Consequently, there will be in the mental sphere a constant bringing forth and dying of larvae, naturally at the cost of the mental matter of each human being. We are causing these events by our own psychic excitement. The reasons can be very different, usually fear, grief, sorrow, fright, hatred and envy and such like producing them. The shape that the larva shows depends on the cause of the psychic excitement and is always symbolic. Anyone who knows something about symbolism will be able to get a clear idea about this problem. For example, a thought of love will always be symbolized by a heart, a thought of hatred by an arrow or a flash, etc. In spite of the fact that the larvae, these undesirable mental inhabitants, cannot be seen by the normal human being, they still do exist, and the well-trained magician can see them on the mental plane. In sensitive or excitable persons, the mental matter is much more separable and the reproduction of larvae is obviously easier and more intense. Such people wreck themselves, their health, especially their nerves, but they also damage their intellectual faculties and involve other highly suggestible people too. All kinds of mass psychosis are originating here. There is no need to describe mass psychosis in detail, because everybody will have made observations and had experiences regarding this problem. The more one returns to the cause of the psychic excitement and the more attention one pays to it, the stronger the larva will become. Any larva that is condensed very strongly will show a great deal of self-preservation instinct and will try to prolong its duration of life as far as possible. For this reason, it stimulates the mind of the given person, trying at every opportunity to draw his attention to the cause of excitement and to revive it constantly. Such a well-fed larva can become fatal to a sensitive or emotional individual, and numerous mental disturbances such as persecution mania and the like are the result of it. Many people are living under the erroneous supposition of being haunted and destroyed by black magicians, whereas they are in fact victims of their own fantasies, or putting it correctly, victims of the larva they have been creating themselves. People like this usually will not find out about this problem until they leave their mortal frame. Only a very few persons are actually haunted magically. Think of the numerous Inquisition victims of the past. No doubt there is a certain advantage for the average man in that the old order has changed, yielding to a new one, for if a man's belief is bad, it will not be changed by burning. But one has thrown out the baby with the bath water without touching the roots of the matter and without verifying the higher laws. Now the magician will realize why such stress has been laid on the importance of introspection, control, and mastering of the thoughts at the beginning of the practical part of this work. Supposing he did not get the thoughts under control of his willpower in the course of his development, he would unconsciously create larvae that might become fatal to him sooner or later. Next, I am going to describe another group of entities existing in the mental sphere, namely the group of the phantoms or phantasms. The difference between a larva and a phantasm is as follows: a larva is quite unconsciously adopting a shape in the mental sphere, appropriate to the motive of the single or repeated psychic emotion, whereas a phantom accepts a certain form originating in the fantasy of man exactly in the same way as it happens to be with the larvae. The phantom is likewise reinforced, revived, and animated by the repeated evocation of the picture, regardless of whatever the matter might be, and it will be capable of influencing not only the mental or astral plane, but also the material level. Two examples may serve to illustrate this topic. A very remarkable example is the so-called magic persecution mania that I shall describe from two certain points of view, with reference to the phantoms. There are certain human beings with an innate scowl or with demoniacal features, and whose outward appearance consequently gives the impression of black magicians, but who probably haven't got the faintest idea of any human science, to say nothing at all of magic. It is sufficient for any easily suggestible, emotionally excitable, or rather conceited person to meet with such a type of man, whether in business or in personal concern, and our test subject, as we shall call it, will instantly have the sensation of a strong dislike and antipathy towards the antagonist. It can happen that our type is exhibiting a whimsical behavior without wanting to do so or even knowing about it. The first thought entering the test subject's mind will be that he is facing a black magician. Maybe, for some reason or other, this test person is thinking too highly of this type of man, and the first step toward self-suggestion has already been done. Sooner or later, small awkward everyday incidents will never be cleared up, but the blame for them will be set on our type of man. From now on, the attention is stirred up, one is watching oneself, and the picture of the type becomes more distinct. Already one begins to feel persecuted. The eyes grow more glittering, his appearance reveals itself in dreams, the picture becomes more vivid and eventually emerges even in broad daylight. Finally, one constantly lives under the impression of being persecuted at every turn. With the help of a very lively imagination, the picture can be condensed to such a degree that it becomes visible even to other similarly sensitive persons. Feeling persecuted in this manner, with the picture continually working on his mind, our test subject may be argued into anything, even the worst. He looks for help, begins to pray, and does his best to scare away this terrible influence. He gets a nervous breakdown, gradually becomes insane, and ends up by committing suicide or else in a mental hospital for the rest of his life. The phantom has fulfilled its task. How terrific is the shock, however, if such a spirit must convince itself in the mental sphere that it is committing a well-organized magic suicide. What a bitter disappointment. Our type man of course has not the faintest idea of what happened and will never realize that he was nothing but a means to an end. His face and his conduct were only the form, the pattern from which our test subject created the destructive being, the phantom whose victim he became in the end. Such and similar sad examples happen more frequently than you would believe, sometimes faster, more drastically, in other cases more slowly, furtively, insidiously. But should you dare to tell the persecuted person the truth, he would never believe it because the phantom knows well how to hinder its victims from escaping. If the guiding hand of divine providence leads such an unhappy persecuted person to a genuine magician who finds out the phantom's trickery, he will have a very difficult task to convince the victim, to lead him to the right path, and to teach him a different, normal mode of thinking. At certain times, especially if the victim is under the spell of a phantom, the helper will have to interfere very firmly indeed, now and again, even drastically to restore the mental balance of the individual. The second example shows the same occurrence but with a different underlying motive. Here we have to deal with a phantom of eroticism. The birth of such a phantom, if one may use the expression of birth at all, takes place in the face, the beautiful body of a living person, sometimes only a photo, a pornographic illustration or something similar with the purpose of provoking the lust, the sexual instinct, regardless of the person belonging to the female or male sex. Provided anyone being in love, having no opportunity at all of satisfying his personal longing, the stronger and more vehement this yearning will grow, and at the same time the phantom's insinuations will become stronger, because it is thriving entirely on thoughts of yearning. The more the concerned person tries to resist this unsatisfied love, the more obtrusive the phantom will become. At first it will turn up in dreams and allow its victim to revel in the most delightful transport of love. A little later it will provoke the sexual instinct and allow sexual intercourse in the victim's dreams. The pollutions produced in this way help the phantom to become denser and to influence the victim more and more, because the sperm represents the vital power that the phantom is sucking up like a vampire. The point in question here is not the material sperm, but the animal vital power accumulated in the sperm. The victim is losing the ground under his feet, his willpower is diminishing, and the phantom gradually wins the upper hand. If fate is not so kind to such a one as to have him enlightened in good time and to find the right distraction for him, the phantom's mode of action will result in more dangerous effects. The person becomes confused, stops eating, the nerves are overexcited and such like. The love phantom can be condensed to such a degree by unsatisfied passion that it can adopt bodily forms, seducing his victim to onanism and other artificial stimulation of the genital organs. Thousands of people have fallen victims of phantoms by committing suicide as the result of disappointment in love or unsatisfied passions. This problem recalls the memory of true occurrences of the medieval succubi and the trials for witchcraft connected therewith. A very dangerous pleasure indeed. In the light of the two foregoing instances, the magician may observe the activity of the phantasms, and he will be able to form such specters himself. But do not forget, sooner or later, he always will run the risk of being influenced or mastered by them. He knows what is happening in the average individual, and how to produce these phantasms consciously in the magic way, but never will he be induced to execute such practices himself, always remembering the magic sentence, "Love is the love, but love under a strong will." There is one theme left to be described, that of the phantasms or shadows. Phantasms are animate presentations of people already deceased. I will pay particular attention to this theme to avoid many errors and enable everyone to sift the chaff from the wheat. As soon as a human being leaves behind the mortal frame, it is at once in the fourth state of aggregation, usually called the world beyond. Without any mediating substance, it is impossible for a being to operate on our tridimensional sphere, just as a fish cannot swim without water. The same thing prevails upon beings already passed away to the world beyond. Remembering, praising, mourning the deceased, any memory of or tribute to them will create and enliven imaginary pictures of the dead, which as a result of frequent repetition have a rather long duration of life. We call these pictures, created by the living ones, phantoms. It is this kind of phantom that manifest themselves in great numbers to the so-called spiritualists, evokers, diviners, etc. The spooks and hobgoblins also are nothing else but phantoms preserving, condensing, and thriving on the affection and attachment of the bereaved ones, as it happens in the case of the shadows. This can be stated without difficulty by citing a being that manifests itself in different places at the same minute at once through so-called mediums, which is nothing but a manifestation of the dead person's phantom, because phantoms can be created by the hundreds. It is very sad that these phantoms always are mistaken for the real dead person by the spiritualistic mediums. A lot of mischief, self-deception, and fraud is carried out in this line. One can observe, for instance, that one of the mediums is communicating with a famous leader or general, a second one with an artist, another with a saint, in a different place with a pharaoh, and immediately again with an angel. Therefore it is not at all surprising that this particular field of knowledge will meet with a host of opponents and mockers, because of its amount of self-deception. No wonder that a phantom has such a strong instinct of self-preservation as to present itself as a vampire to the medium or the whole circle, and indeed becomes fatal to the neighborhood as well. Of course, all this does not mean that a genuine magician who masters the fourth state of aggregation, the Akasa principle, would not be able to communicate with a deceased person or with an intellect that is not yet embodied. I have already quoted the practice in the chapter about mediumistic writing. Apart from that, any magician is able to form a housing, a shape, with the help of the imagination, transfer it into the fourth state of aggregation, and to persuade or even to force the true, desired being to enter this form and manifest itself to the external world. This practice belongs to the field of necromancy or conjuring magic and has nothing at all to do with the generally known spiritualism. The genuine magician will use this practice only in extreme cases, and he will not evoke a being away from its sphere, because anything a being of the fourth state of aggregation has to say or to fulfill in the material or astral world can be achieved likewise by the magician himself through his maturity. Summary of exercises of Step 6 I Magic Mental Training. 1. Meditation on the own spirit. 2. Becoming conscious of the senses in the spirit. 2. Magic Psychic Training. 1. Preparation to master the Akasa principle. 2. Deliberate induction to trance with the help of the Akasa. 3. Mastering of the elements with the help of an individual ritual from the Akasa. 3. Magic Physical Training. 1. Deliberate creation of beings. A. Elementals. B. Larvae. C. Phantasms, shadows. D. Phantoms. End of Step 6. Step 7 Magic Mental Training. 7. In step 6 the scholar learned to become conscious of the own spirit, to act deliberately in the body as a spirit and also to use his senses consciously. In this stage he will consciously pursue the properties of the spirit or of the mental body, and use them as well. Here, of course, just like anywhere else, the analogy of the elements is to be considered. It has been mentioned before that the fire element can be transformed into light and conversely. Without light there would never be any reception of color for the eyes, consequently, we could not see our eyes without the existence of light. From this point of view, it is quite obvious that the sense of visual perception is analogous to the fire element. This element, related to the spirit, shows a specific property of the will. The mental property belonging to the air element is the intellect with all its aspects, and it is imputed to the hearing. The water element of the spirit is expressed in the feeling or life. These three elements of the spirit, fire, air, and water together produce the earth principle of the spirit, which shows itself in the specific quality of consciousness. The Akasa principle, in its simplest form, expresses itself as conscience. The magician will at once understand the great importance of this analogy if he has already developed so far as to achieve the magical equilibrium in the astral body by means of introspection. The next task he will be asked to fulfill is to analyze his spirit and to find out which of the elements is predominant in his spirit. In the case of people having a very strong will, which does not mean stubbornness, the fire element will of course be predominant in his spirit. If the intellect or the intelligence with all its aspects is prevailing in the magician's spirit, the element of air is supposed to be the stronger one. In case the magician should be above all an emotional character, the water element will play the main part in him. If he has a weak memory, the consciousness will be affected very often, and one can take it for granted that the prevailing element is that of the earth. This classification serves to establish the efficiency of the elements in the spirit and to arrange the development so that the weaker elements are balanced by suitable concentration exercises and deep meditation. The magician must neither allow the fire principle, nor the water, air, or earth to prevail, and has to know how to classify his exercises in such a manner that the intensity of his work will neutralize the elements. Let me explain this problem in detail in the light of an example. Suppose the magician's intellect to be on a very high level, his will being weak and not quite up to the maturity of his intellect, then he must try to strengthen his volition by suitable concentration exercises that bring out the fire principle in the spirit. He should mainly select exercises that train the eyes, exercises of optic imagination, considering that the eye corresponds to the fire element. But if the magician has a strong will and a weak intellect, we shall come to the conclusion that he has to give his keenest attention to the hearing by imagination exercises, i.e., he has to choose concentration and meditation exercises that fully engage the ear. Should the magician own a strong will and a very good intellect, but his emotional life or his feelings somehow lag behind, then he will have to render his spirit more emotional, which he can accomplish through such imagination and meditation exercises that influence the feeling very strongly. If the magician notices that his astral body as well as his mental body incline mainly toward the earth element, which is to say that his thoughts come very slowly in his spirit and that he gets depressed, that indicates that the earth element prevails and that first of all he must train his consciousness with the help of suitable exercises. The magician has to develop his spirit to perfect harmony with regard to the elements, and to choose exercises corresponding to the elements and at the same time to the senses, so that the will or volition, fire, the intellect, air, the feeling, water, and consciousness, earth, are enhanced and developed evenly. The outcome of this description is the following schedule, which I will quote for the sake of a synopsis: element, fire sense, eyes quality, will exercise, optic air ears intellect acoustic water earth Akasa perception taste / smell all in all feeling consciousness conscience emotional expand konsk. Realization the Akasa principle developing from concentration, there is no need of descending to particulars. It is also superfluous to quote single exercises of concentration and meditation, according to the specific qualities of the elements prevailing in him, the scholar can easily compile them. He will select imaginations of objects, pictures, etc., for his concentration exercises if he has a weak will. After all, he went through these exercises already in step 2 of this course. The above harmony schedule is a signpost, so to speak, a compass to find out which element is preponderant and which exercise has to be taken up more intensely. As a result of success with this Hermetic classification, the Akasa principle will reveal itself to him. Magic Psychic Training, 7. A very particular topic we shall deal with in this step concerns the development of the astral senses with regard to the elements. The magician's astral senses have been trained and developed in any case in the course of all the preceding exercises, nevertheless there is need of an extraordinary drill in cases of poor abilities for one or the other faculty, because every human being has different talents. Therefore it will be opportune to quote exercises here that enable the magician to develop the sense of the astral body fast and without difficulty. In the magic mental training of step 6, the scholar learned to become conscious of his spirit and to act as a spirit through the astral body as well as through the material one. In pursuance of this, I will deal with one of the most fascinating problems, namely that of clairvoyance. Numerous books have been published about this theme, but the ones that have come into my hands do not offer the slightest practical profit to any magician. Therefore it is very useful indeed to labor very thoroughly in the field of clairvoyance. Generally speaking, clairvoyance means the second sight as it is popularly named, or the power of seeing, without the use of the eye, events taking place at a distance and in the past, present or future, or seeing deceased people. Very few authors describe this power from a psychological or any other point of view, and that is why it shall be our next task to study the phenomenon of clairvoyance very thoroughly. First of all, the magician will realize that there are various kinds of clairvoyance. The principal kind is the inborn capacity of clairvoyance which its bearer has been granted whether in the invisible world already, or which he brought with him from a former into his present existence. This kind of clairvoyance is the best, but very few humans enjoy it, being born clairvoyant to such a degree that they can practice it immediately without any effort at all. A second kind of clairvoyance is that which occurs spontaneously and is therefore to be regarded as a pathological symptom. A shock in the case of severe illness also can cause the capacity of clairvoyance. This usually happens in the case of people who lose their equilibrium as the result of a stroke, a nervous breakdown, or otherwise through a physical or psychic trauma where a kind of clairvoyance will occur in a more or less distinctive form as a concomitance. This sort of clairvoyance is naturally undesirable for the magician because it will sooner or later lead to a complete breakdown, which not only implies a total loss of this power, but also is detrimental to the health and very often the cause of an untimely death. Clairvoyants of this kind are very pitiable indeed, even if their success should be convincing proof. This capacity belongs to all the persons who, having a mediumistic predisposition, were induced to clairvoyance by some beings. Nor is this kind recommendable to the magic practitioner, because people like this usually end up in a lunatic asylum. A great number of persons who are taken to mental hospitals and who were meddling with spiritualism without a reliable guide can blame their hopeless condition on spiritualism, and it does not matter in the least whether the motives of the study were earnest intentions or mere curiosity or whatever else may have induced them. Another kid of clairvoyance that belongs to this group is the forced production of this power with the help of drugs like opium, hashish, peyote, soma, etc. This will be without any interest to the magician, because most of these victims will fall prey to the addiction of these dangerous drugs, which paralyze the ethical and intellectual faculties, the willpower, and finally the nervous system, injuring the health as well as the development. Such cases are recorded by the millions in the Orient, but they occur in great numbers in the Occident as well as in all the other civilized countries. The magician certainly has the opportunity, as long as he has not achieved the necessary maturity, of convincing himself of the existence of clairvoyance and other supernatural occurrences in one way or another, but usually, and that is the worst of it, he does not stop at this conviction. He too may become prey to intoxication and fall into the same condition as so many drug-stricken persons. For this reason I will not describe any method in this work that would tempt the magician to experiment on such things, but I shall only point out quite harmless methods that allow clairvoyance to occur automatically, in conformity with the spiritual maturity and as a concomitance of the higher initiation. Another kind of clairvoyance is the one that is caused by impairment or temporary loss of the eyes. Most of the books teaching clairvoyance recommend staring at an object, a magic mirror, a crystal ball, or at gems, and those are good methods, but they are not adequate for everybody. These expedients for the development of clairvoyance are useful only in the hands of a trained magician, but they must not call forth clairvoyance by stimulating the optic nerve. They are meant only to serve as a mere aid to an eye that already is trained consciously. From the magical point of view, not a single dodge, however highly praised or scrupulously executed, is capable of producing the gift of clairvoyance. This capacity depends on the talents and on the psychical and astral development and maturity of the magician. Further chapters in which I shall teach how to make fluid condensers also will include instructions for the production of magic mirrors and other appliances. The magician ought not to forget that all the dodges and appliances mentioned here are nothing but poor expedients. By no means, however, are they the real factor that produces the desired result of genuine clairvoyance. Finally, I will mention the latter kind of clairvoyance, which occurs as a concomitance of the correct magical development and which is caused through the systematic display of the clairvoyance eyes. I have resolved to quote in this book a secret magical method that has not been mentioned in any other work up to now, but which is exceedingly useful from the Hermetic point of view as well as by analogy with the laws of the elements. The practice of the development of the astral senses follows below. 1. The magic clairvoyance. Before I describe the proper exercise, I must premise that here we have got to deal with the aspect of the light. As you know, light is an aspect of the fire element, and therefore analogous to the will and the eyes. Consequently, the point of this experiment is to intensify the imagination of the light, i.e., to imagine the light optically to such a degree as to grant the success aimed at. Take up your asana posture and imagine that you are inhaling the universal light, similar in form and brilliance to our sunlight, whether through the pulmonary and pore breathing or only imaginarily. Regard your body as a hollow organ filled completely with this universal bright white light. Now concentrate the quality of clairvoyance into this light in the body, i.e., imagine that the light is penetrating everything, seeing everything, and looking into everything. Neither space nor time is any hindrance to this light. Your conviction of this quality of the light is to be firm as a rock, and not the faintest doubt is allowed to arise. If you are a religious man, it should be easy for you to believe that this universal light is representing a part of God, who owns all the qualities described here. As soon as you have sucked in the light into your body in this manner, together with the quoted qualities, and if you can feel its tension and penetrating power inside you, accumulate the light with the help of your imagination from the feet and hands towards the head, compressing the light to such a degree that it includes both your eyeballs. You can also fill first one and then the other eye with the accumulated light as described here, if this way is more suitable to you. There are magicians who develop and enliven clairvoyance in one eye only, leaving the other eye free and undeveloped. It is left entirely to the scholar's judgment whether this pattern is worth imitating, but as I see it, it is far better to prepare both eyes equally for clairvoyance. As soon as you have performed the accumulation of light in your eyeballs, imagine that your eyes have got all the abilities concentrated in the light. Endure for at least 10 minutes in this exercise, and if you are quite sure that your eyes, which are imaginarily filled with the universal light, have also accepted the quality of this light, allow the light to disperse again with the help of the imagination, whether directly from your eyes into the universal ocean of light, or to enter your body in its original form, and from there to dissolve in the universal light. Both the methods described here are equally good, and the outcome will be the same. The important point is that the eyes will become receptive again in the normal way as soon as they are set free from the light. This is necessary for the simple reason that the astral eyes of the magician, when developed in this manner, will not become oversensitive so that they would not be able to discern what normal eyes or the clairvoyant ones are seeing. Supposing that the magician failed to dissolve the concentrated light, his eyes probably would remain clairvoyant and he would hardly be able to distinguish between material and spiritual matters. Therefore he ought to have his power of clairvoyance well in hand and allow it to become effective only if he thinks it desirable. By frequent repetition of this exercise, the magician will achieve such skill that he can allow his clairvoyant eye, the so-called light eye, to function in a few moments. Eyes prepared in this way, whether closed or open, can see anything the magician wishes to, whether in a crystal globe or in a magic mirror. His clairvoyant eye will see everything. The quality of clairvoyant perception then depends exclusively on the purity of his character. An excellent remedy contributing to a quicker success and influencing the physical eyes very favorably, so that people suffering from bad eyesight or stricken with an eye complaint can profit from not only the magical point of view but from the sanitary one as well, is the preparation of a magical ophthalmic fire lotion. The following ingredients are necessary: 1. A large bottle of distilled water. 2. Chamomile flowers, dried or fresh. 3. Eyebright, dried or fresh. 4. 7 to 9 osier or hazel switches which you can find in fields. Strip the leaves, then dry the sticks in sunlight. 5. Filter paper and a small funnel. Now you can prepare the eye lotion. Pour a half pint of distilled water into a clean container, boil it, then add 2 teaspoons of chamomile flowers and 1 teaspoon of eyebright. Let them boil for only a few seconds, then take it off the fire and cover the pot with a lid. After 10 minutes, filter it into another clean container. When the tea has cooled down, take a bunch of the osier or hazelnut twigs, set one end aflame, and let them burn. Now dip the blazing ends into the tea. By doing so, the material fire element has been transferred into the tea, which one can already regard as a fluid condenser. I will write about this detail in a further chapter. Now filter this fluid condenser into another clean container. The filtering is important to remove any chips or ashes produced by dipping the burning twigs into the liquid. Pour the tea into a bowl and put it in front of you. Now inhale the fire element through the lungs or pores, or both at the same time, into your body and fill it entirely with this element. At this projection, there is no great attention to be given to the intensity of the warmth, as you will feel it in any case, but do not forget that the fire element has to bear your desire that you transferred to it through your imagination. After transferring to the fire element your desire to have your material eyes strengthened and your astral eye developed, project the fire element in the same way as you performed the experiment of the light accumulation, whether by way of the solar plexus or one of your hands or your breathing, into the liquid. If you get the feeling that the projection is not sufficient, repeat the experiment several times, but no more than 7 to 9 times. Thereby the prepared condenser will turn into a strong essence that will not only have a very fine effect on the eyesight, but also strengthens, enlivens, and develops the astral senses. Now pour the fluid condenser into a clean bottle and keep it in a cool spot. This ophthalmic fire lotion may be used for strengthening the eyesight or for magical purposes. In the case of weak eyesight, one can simply drop this liquid condenser into the eyes without any hesitation because the two herb combination is anti-inflammatory and an eye tonic, but for magical practice, i.e., the development of the astral senses, it will suffice to moisten a piece of cotton wool wrapped in gauze or a strip of clean linen and to use it as a poultice during the experiment of animating the eyes with light. Later on, as soon as the astral eyes are better developed, the fluid condenser poultices can be omitted and it will be sufficient to perform the accumulation of light in the eyeballs. After frequent repetition, when the physical eyes are already developed by these light exercises, one has only to direct the attention to the astral eye with the desire for being able to see with it. Apart from the duration of the experiment, one might also use these poultices before going to bed to achieve an automatic effect during the night, but there is a slight disadvantage: the eyes and the eyelids would become supersensitive as a result of the intrusion of the fire element from the frequent use of the poultice. It is therefore more serviceable to use the poultices for the duration of the exercises only. The poultice is to be fastened with a scarf during the exercise to prevent it from falling off. This magic operation is to be performed without the presence of other persons. One ought to try to keep the poultice as well as the essence for a certain time, so it need not be renewed from one experiment to the other and does not fall into the hands of incompetent people, not even members of the family. If the scholar has worked through all the foregoing exercises, he will develop his eye for clairvoyance in an absolutely harmless way in a few months' time, and will be well talented even after a few weeks, following the method described here, and he will be able to fulfill all the other tasks and operations still ahead of him in the knowledge of magic. It is quite impossible to quote all the successes obtained with the different methods of clairvoyance mentioned here, because they are so manifold and so reasonably obvious that it must be left to the magician himself how far-reaching he will be able to train his astral eyes. At all events, he may be warned not to boast of the abilities he has won, or even worse, to misuse them to harm his fellow men. He ought to utilize them solely for the benefit of mankind. Time and space won't be a handicap to him, and nothing will remain concealed before him as far as his clairvoyant eyes are concerned. To the magical development of the astral clairaudience, this development is very much in line with the one of clairvoyance. The faculty of the astral clairaudience is based on the fact that one is able to hear voices even at the remotest distance and, at the same time, to understand the language of all beings. At the beginning, this faculty manifests itself in thinking aloud, coming from the inside, whether from the heart region or from the solar plexus. After a long spell of exercising, the astral clairvoyance will develop to such a perfection that one can distinctly perceive everything with the supernormal hearing, similarly as if there were normal talking to anybody. This faculty is a privilege of all magicians, and without it there would scarcely be any progress in magic. For this particular reason, this type of astral clairaudience has to be handled with the same carefulness as astral seeing, and the exercises therefore must not be neglected at any rate. All that has been said about clairvoyance, about predisposition for it, about pathological symptoms will turn out to be true as well for clairaudience and clairfeeling. Let us turn now to the practice of clairaudience. For this exercise, nothing is required but a fluid condenser and a small piece of cotton wool. Make 2 small tampons from it to fit in the ear. Moisten these cotton plugs with the fluid condenser and put both of them in front of you. According to the instructions you were given for training the astral eyes, you will now work with the air element, filling your body with it by breathing through the lungs and pores. The whole body is assumed to be filled with air like a balloon. Imagine into this air principle the desire for the faculty of clairaudience in your astral body as well as in the material one. Provided you have the inward certainty that the air element has been sufficiently impregnated with your desire and with your imagination, project the prepared air element into the 2 cotton plugs, whether through the solar plexus, your hands, or your breath by compressing and accumulating the air element that fills your body, to such a degree that it will adopt the same size as the cotton plugs. You may magically impregnate both plugs at the same time, or one at a time with the entire amount of the element. The main point of this experiment is the firm conviction and unshakable faith that this faculty is developing swiftly in you. You can use as a fluid condenser a strong decoction of chamomile flowers in distilled water. Take 2 tablespoons of chamomile flowers per cup of water, filter them after scalding, and keep the liquid cool to prevent the fluid condenser from getting moldy. A moldy condenser is not ineffective, but it is unsanitary. When you have loaded these 2 cotton plugs with air element, whether simultaneously or separately, put both into your ears so that they are completely crammed. Now introduce the Akasa principle into your entire head imaginarily, transfer your consciousness to the ear region, and imagine the faculty of absolute clairaudience. Imagine the Akasa principle introduced into your ears is instantly producing the absolute clairaudience power in you. After a long period of meditating and concentrating on this effect, dissolve the Akasa principle into the universal Akasa, remove the cotton plugs, and keep them carefully because they must not be touched by anyone else. If the plugs fall into the hands of some incompetent person, you will have to prepare new ones for yourself. Otherwise, it will be sufficient to remove the plugs from the ears to allow the accumulated air element to dissolve again with the help of the imagination. It is obviously of greater advantage to use new cotton plugs for every experiment and to load them anew, if you can afford the necessary time. Should you like to resort to your astral sense of hearing, all you need to do is lead the akaza in the size of your ear passages, into the inner chambers of both your ears. After a long time of exercising, you will be able to use your clairaudience for your purposes. As soon as you do not need this faculty anymore, lead the akaza in your ear back into the universal akaza. By introducing the akaza principle into the acoustic chambers, the mental as well as the astral hearing is influenced and developed, and you will attain to the physical clairaudience with the help of the concentrated air element. Anyone meditating intensely on this problem will instantly find the coherence and may compare the operation with the wireless, where the ether as the akaza principle of matter and the air likewise are playing their part as transmitters of the sound waves. 3. Development of the astral clairfeeling, clairsentience. Before passing on to the development of the astral clairfeeling, let us take up our magical diary and transfer ourselves to the time when we were engaged thoroughly with the introspection of the various good and bad qualities. According to the magic mirror, we could establish then, which of the qualities corresponding to the element in question were predominant in our mind. How important introspection was indeed then is clearly shown by the fact that just this preponderance of the element concerned points to our astral sensory center. If the fire element had been predominant, the sensory element was the head, to put it correctly, the forehead. If it was the air element, it is the heart. In the case of prevalence of the water element, it is the solar plexus, and if it has been the earth element, the sensory center is in the hands or the thighs. Having thus established our astral sensory area, let us pass to the practice. You have to act in exactly the same manner as you did when training the two previous senses. The necessary requisites are, a piece of linen or a cotton wool plug which you moisten slightly with a fluid condenser. This condenser may again be a strong decoction of chamomile flowers. At this performance, you are loading your body once with the water element through pulmonary and pore breathing, and with the desire that this element may produce clairfeeling in you. The term clairfeeling means the faculty of perceiving and feeling all the phenomena and powers occurring in the elements and in akaza. To this field also belongs the faculty of psychometry, the clear perception of the present, past, and future of any object. Even the power of materialization of any thought, any being, no matter whether the point in question is a self-created being or an entity already existing in the akaza, belongs to this domain. Other faculties connected with sense perception and touch perception also can be registered in the category of clairfeeling. Intuition too originates in clairfeeling. These few examples may be sufficient to explain the clairfeeling power. As soon as you have accumulated the water element in the whole body through the pores and through breathing, load it with the intense imagination of the faculty of clairfeeling. You must be absolutely sure that it is strong enough to arouse this faculty in your astral body. With the help of imagination, draw the water element from your body, whether through the solar plexus, the forehead, hand, or by breathing out, accumulating it in the cotton ball or piece of linen soaked in the fluid condenser. You may repeat the loading but no more than 7 to 9 times. When doing this exercise, do not take up your rooting posture, but lie down comfortably on a couch, or on the floor. The main condition is to lie rather flat, only the head remaining a little higher. To develop the astral clairfeeling, you need not utilize the water element directly, but only the magnetic attractive power of the water. Before starting the exercise, put the fluid condenser on the predetermined sensory area. This exercise has to be performed with your eyes closed right from the beginning. Now imagine that your entire body is swimming in the universal water element, as if you were in the center of the surface of an endless ocean. You feel nothing but water. Be very attentive, for it is quite possible that you will fall asleep during this exercise in spite of all your carefulness. Make up your mind not to fall asleep, for if this should become a habit, you would have great difficulty fighting against sleep while doing your exercises. In the previously mentioned imagination, you transferred yourself with your consciousness to the sensory area. Now imagine that the magnetic power of the water you have accumulated within yourself will enliven the finest particles of your sensation field and produce the astral clairfeeling. You must be able to imagine the magnetic attractive power of the water so intensely that it becomes an incontestable reality. If by long meditation you have the firm conviction that you duly enough enlivened this sensory field, dissolve the water element within your body into the universal element again, take off the fluid condenser, and reduce the concentrated element to the universal element. Now the exercise is at an end. In case you would like to use the sensation field practically at one time or another, the transfer of consciousness into this field will be sufficient to put this faculty into action immediately. To further the display of the astral senses of seeing, hearing and feeling, I deem it opportune to recommend that you continue these exercises even if you can spend only very little time on them. The real success will not be far off. We shall omit the development of the other senses, taste and smell, for the time being because they are not important enough for the practical